We at the Driskell Center specifically are honored to gather in partnership with the Association of Critical Race Art History, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Howard University Gallery of Art, and the Department of Art in Howard University's Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts. This colloquium carries the name and legacy of James A. Porter, a pioneering art historian, educator, and artist whose scholarship laid the foundations for the field of African American art history. Porter's mentorship of David C. Driskell was a pivotal moment in the development of the field, and one that helped shape Driskell's expansive vision for Black art and the central place of it in American cultural life. Their relationship reminds us all that intellectual kinship and intergenerational exchange are vital sources of strength in our communities. In a moment of heightened social and political volatility, spaces like this, dedicated to rigorous inquiry, dialogue, and care, are more essential than ever. They remind us that African American art is not a footnote or a sidebar. It is American art. It reflects, critiques, and reimagines our national story. Our programs this evening are made possible in part by the Maryland State Arts Council and the University of Maryland's Arts for All initiative, as well as support of the Department of Art History and Archaeology, the Meyerhoff Center for Jewish Studies, and the Department of African American and African Studies, and of course, our many dedicated patrons. I also want to take a moment to thank Dr. Melanie Harvey and her team at Howard. I also want to thank Jacqueline Francis and Kamara Dia-Holloway for bringing us all together in this wonderful series of days. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge my staff of the Driskell Center. Yes. Your creativity, your commitment, and your care make gatherings like this possible. Thank you especially to Dr. Abby Iran, Rashonda Lazar, and Juhi Kim. You can clap. For their extraordinary efforts in coordinating tonight's program. And in closing, I want to extend my most heartfelt gratitude to the artists, the scholars, the community members who make all of this possible. Our shared belief in the importance of Black art, scholarship, and community is what has and what will sustain us. So thank you for being part of this. And now I will introduce Dr. Tess Korobkin, Assistant Professor of American Art and a member of the Driskell Center Faculty Advisory Council, who will present this year's Porter Driskell Book Award.
It is with great honor that we present this year's David C. Driskell Book Award to Stitching Love and Loss, a Gee's Bend Quilt by Dr. Lisa Gale Collins. Dr. Collins is Professor of Art on the Sarah Gibson Blanding Chair and Director of the American Studies Program at Vassar College. She is a distinguished art historian and interdisciplinary scholar whose work has contributed trailblazing approaches to a wide range of topics, including African American women artists, the Black arts movement, and many other dimensions of the intersections of race, gender, and creativity in the United States. She is also the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, and this evening we are here to add another, as we recognize her most recent book with our annual award. Stitching Love and Loss, a Gee's Bend Quilt, is an extraordinary book that tells the story of a quilt made in late 1941 or 1942 by Missouri Petway when she was newly experiencing the loss of her husband, Nathaniel. A textile elegy, as Dr. Collins calls it, pieced together from the strips and blocks of his worn work clothes. In this deeply moving, creative, and interdisciplinary book, the story of this quilt comes to encompass the stories and history of the extended families and surrounding Black Belt farming communities that helped conceive, shape, and construct the cotton covering and keep the powerful memory of its making. The implications of this history are expansive. As Dr. Collins writes, in countless ways, Gee's Bend is not, as oft described, remote. It has been and continues to be at the heart of Black history, freedom, movement, expression, and struggle. Stitching Love and Loss is also a profound meditation on the experience of grief, offering learning and insight into deeply human questions. How do we tend to the loss of a loved one? What are the things people in mourning need and feel moved to do? What are the roles for creativity in grief? In wrestling with these questions, Professor Collins enacts an inspiring model of what scholarship can be when a scholar seeks not only to learn about a subject, but to learn from it. Stitching Love and Loss is structured like a quilt, each chapter drawing on a quilt-making step to explore integral elements of the history, life, and legacy of the community around Gee's Bend. In many ways, this book is an especially fitting book for the David C. Driskell Award. One way is that it embodies David Driskell's legacy of bringing the whole multifaceted self, in his example as artist, critic, curator, historian, to preserving and elevating precarious and undervalued, precious and extraordinary histories of African American creative practice. Congratulations, Dr. Collins.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and to have that book recognized. That was a long-loved, closely held book. And I talk about the book as getting its start at the seminar table in Central Harlem at the Schomburg Center when the late Dr. Colin Palmer called on my landline phone in 2011 asking me to be in residence to launch the book. And that really was the intensive launch. But in preparing for today, I looked deeply at my emails and pulled deeply from my own memory. And I had always had a memory of being in a hotel on the Maryland campus and not being able to sleep. And Dr. Adrienne Childs had asked me to present. It was the 2010 Driskell Center Symposium. It was called Autobiography, Performance, Identity, the Symposium on African American and African Diasporan Women in the Visual Arts. And I was struggling with my paper, and this is very unlikely, like me, but I, at the night before, decided to write something else. And what I really wasn't sleeping well, but I had this just kind of primal desire to think about this quilt and to think about grief and to think about the relationship between creativity and grief. So I actually found the old symposium notebook, and I was the morning talk, 10:45, and I talked on the art of healing, and that was the first piece of this project. So that was 15 years ago. But I also want to just signal, because I was looking at the program, it was just such an honor, and it continues to be an honor. The Driskell Center and the James Porter Colloquium have been generative touchstones for me and my work for decades now. At that particular symposium, I had the incredible fortune of sharing space with Dr. Cherie Smith, Dr. Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw, Dr. Harriet McNamee, Dr. Krista Clark, and Dr. Krista Thompson, who all shared their work. The intro performance was by Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, and the keynote was by Lorraine O'Grady, the late Lorraine O'Grady. So I was just really moved to remember that, and so to come back here is just beautiful. And people who have read the book also know that I was actively grieving the loss of my father in writing that book. And he had gone to Howard for his social work degree, and my mom had been a school teacher in Maryland, and that's how they met. And so it's just beautiful to come back. So I'm thrilled to have this honor for a work that I started here 15 years ago. I'm thrilled that the work has been of gentle use, and I'm honored to be part of this community. What I've been telling to my students lately is stay close to creativity, stay close to the earth, and stay close to each other, because the world needs all of our work now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was beautiful. And I'm so glad that you mentioned students, because nurturing the next generation of artists and scholars and curators was really at the heart of Driskell's life work as a teacher, as a mentor, and as an advocate. And in that spirit, we are proud to offer copies of your book free of charge to students who are here tonight. So if you're a student, it's my honor now to introduce the 2025 David C. Driskell Distinguished Lecture, which will be delivered this evening by Dr. Kellie Jones. You can clap now. I mean, we're just going to clap our whole way through. Dr. Jones is a professor in Art History and Archaeology and the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia University. Her research interests include African American and African diaspora artists, Latinx and Latin American artists, and issues in contemporary art and museum history. Dr. Jones has received numerous awards for her work from the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research, Harvard University, Creative Capital, the Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant, and a term as scholar in residence at the Terra Foundation for American Art in Europe in Germany, France. And in 2016, she was named a MacArthur Foundation Fellow, otherwise known as a genius. Professor Jones' writing have appeared in a multitude of exhibition catalogs and journals. She's the author of 2 books published by Duke, I Minded, Living and Writing Contemporary Art from 2011, and South of Pico, African American Artists in Los Angeles in the 1960s and 70s from 2017, which was named the Best Art Book of 2017 in the New York Times, a Best Book of 2017 in Art Forum, and received the Walter and Lillian Lowenfels Criticism Award for the American Book Award in 2018. Her recently published edited volume, David Hammons, published by MIT Press, is the first anthology of texts on the contemporary artist David Hammons. I know, wow. One of the most important living Black artists of our time. Her talk this evening is titled Suzanne Jackson, Ecologies of Abstraction, and she will take a few questions after her lecture. Please help me welcome Dr. Kellie Jones.
know you can hear me because I'm from New York and we know how to talk. Loud. Okay, now I can calm down. Thank you all for being here. I was saying to numerous people, yes, I remember being back in this area that I guess not since COVID, to feel your energy, to see all the people here. Thank you for coming out. It's just really such a warm reception, and I appreciate it. I want to thank the Driskell Center and Professor Sagesi for her invitation, and also I want to dedicate this lecture, as I usually do. I want to dedicate it to Melanie Harvey, because you will see why in the talk, and for all her work, and also to my colleague who showed up, Tobias Welford, who's in the David Hammond's book, so pick that up because he's in it. And finally, to the late Alonzo Davis, who was in this area, of course, for many years in LA, and I think he also figures in this talk a little bit, and it's great, again, to be back here and to open the Porter Colloquium. So let me get started. To experience Suzanne Jackson's art, from her earliest drawings and paintings to her most recent acrylic excursions, is to experience joy made material, tangible. Embedded in the conceptual making process is a sense of radical sovereignty, a rejection of strictures, of scale understood in a boundless, unceasing, ever-changing relationship of planes and things, and a refutation of categorical distinctions. The infinite and anti-categorical profile of the work is perhaps surprisingly also about relationality between all aspects of the living world, humans, plants, animals, as well as connections to the spirit realm and the cosmos. We might speak about them as alternative modes, practices, or webs of intelligibility, notions of relatedness, and immeasurable bonds. Hers are speculative visualities and fictive futures reconciled by love and kinship. Such understanding of Jackson's art comes from thinking with Native scholars to frame the artist's body of work and early experiences as in dialogue with indigenous cultures, where dualities between the human and the natural world, for instance, are not oppositions, but markers of equilibrium and exchange. Given Jackson's Alaska roots, it is aligned with considering traditional astronomical and environmental knowledge, capable of navigating daunting geographies and envisioning place as a landscape of stories. At the same time, Jackson's art honors and partakes of the world-building and transformational concepts integral to theorizations of the African diaspora, the impetus to remake aspects of humanity. Suzanne Jackson's memories of pre-statehood Fairbanks, Alaska are of a small town with a collective focus centering a common good, its humanity and diversity embedded in the natural world. Her membership in both the Audubon Society and 4-H in her childhood reinforced such ideas in relationship to stewardship of the land. With the Arctic Circle a scant 200 miles north, Jackson was surrounded by a powerful mountainous world, for her inculcating survival, compassion, and beauty. She developed a creative practice in her teen years, with her body attuned to and cognizant of the breathtaking living environment and one's conversation with it, unfolding a sense of symbiosis and awe. Like predecessors such as Pacific Northwest artist Thelma Johnson Street, or close contemporaries like Maren Hassinger and Sengen Nguti, Jackson develops art that is transmedial. In the manner of Street, she is invested in painting and dance, while Hassinger and Nguti create three-dimensional engagement with dance and sculpture. Fundamentally, these latter are conversations across and between media that undergirds the 1970s and that Jackson and others bring to mature work. However, Jackson's continued commitment to painting most often sits uneasily in that conceptually driven decade. Jackson continually innovates her method, though never wavering from a steadfast connection to the painted form. And while figures move in and out of focus, it is land and landscape that takes center stage in broad and expansive applications of color and medium. What we always see in Jackson's art is the interconnectedness of the human and the environment in a way that accesses gendered ecologies, which art historian, Melanie Harvey, has identified as the eco-womanism of the paintings, embedded in compositional harmonies of figures and grounds between the human and the terrain. In her early paintings, Jackson crafts a symbolic language of relation and reciprocity between plants, fish, fowl, and people, in allusions to outer physical form, but also through references to inner life or being in the recurring imagery of the heart, a proxy for the soul. Dreamlike and atmospheric, Jackson's work turns always towards the speculative, and in doing so to counter memory, a revised relationship to land, living beings and ancestors, shared materiality and life. These pieces represent a Black feminist world building, one that takes into account gender, ecology, and diaspora. Such strategies and constructs, however, are also very much aligned with indigenous structures of balance and reciprocity, or as others opine, how place matters in Native life. What are our responsibilities to that place that nourishes in constructing preferred futures of decolonization and rebirth? After her formative years in Fairbanks, Jackson retraced her steps to San Francisco. She arrived in 1961, undoubtedly attuned to growing student, free speech, Black power, Chicano, and indigenous activism. Jackson attended San Francisco State College, now university, a broadly accessible public institution in the effervescent California state system. She majored in painting and minored in drama, her coursework including dance, scenic design, and acting. Jackson's experiences in visual art, dance, and drama could find affirmation in a Bay Area bohemia, and San Francisco of that era was more sympathetic to painting. Indeed, Jackson's emerging style certainly can be considered part of key developments in Northern California art making that is often grouped under the moniker Bay Area figurative art, as it privileged a human form and its apparent emergence out of the gestural planes of abstraction. Her imagery channeled a bodily freedom, expansively framing sexuality, gender, love, and varied life forms, experimentation that the era became known for. Bay Area figurative art performed a recognition of the subject, often against an atmospheric and abstract ground. Characterized by fantasy and the esoteric, it arose in the 1950s, often on thickly painted canvases, evincing abstract expressionist handling. In the following decade, works became crisper, expressing the influences of pop. A turn to materiality and slickness in sculptural works by artists such as William T. Wiley and Robert Arneson demonstrated a playfulness along with conceptual underpinnings latent in neo-Dada. Such descriptions certainly apply to Jackson's early work. We can also think generally about the role of women artists like Jackson and Joan Brown, for instance, their innovations and reinventions, as well as the critical misunderstanding that their early work provoked. Both Jackson and Brown dive into flatness and color, qualities ascribed to pop art, but they shift their content towards subjects considered more personally symbolic, Their work leans into so-called domesticity. For both women, giving birth seemed to signal the profound interconnections of the planet. Each developed a lexicon of symbols that entwine the human, animal, and natural worlds in a time that is still unready and may never be ready for female narratives. Their chronicles are wrapped in the speculative, submerged in a distinctive iconography that is aesthetic and painterly. Turning again to indigenous thought, we might consider how, in a North American context, women's spiritual visioning is rooted in arts practices and dreams. Creativity must also be shared with community. Through art, one can protect and provide for the physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being of others. Both Jackson and Brown indeed contributed to the development of Northern California's socially and artistically radical scene, moving beyond rote forms and in many ways seeking an environment beyond masculinist justice or male-prescribed creativity for that matter. Following graduation from San Francisco State in 1966, Jackson embarked on a dance career traveling throughout the Americas for a year before alighting in Los Angeles. Her move between Northern and Southern California is emblematic of a generation of West Coast artists and art scenes that traverse this corridor with fluidity. During Jackson's early years in Los Angeles, she advanced some extraordinary, if underappreciated, techniques, discoveries, and symbolic languages whose significance is only now being fully comprehended and appreciated. Melanie C. Harvey has pointed to the unique idiosyncratic imagery that Jackson cleaved to early on, flora and fauna seemingly of this world and of the world beyond, and the humanoid in composite figurative silhouettes. Jackson's explorations of interiority surface in heart-shaped forms, pop art versions that verge on the cartoonish and are very much in keeping with practices in Northern California. Hearts proliferate in Jackson's work from the 60s and 70s, beginning with Not Every Clown Lives in the Circus, A Heart with Human Features, an unhappy Valentine jaundiced and acerbic, disappointed, and disentangled from the ways of the known world. A small acrylic on canvas, it reveals the beginnings of the artist's facility with paint, her layering of wash and color, recalling the moist, translucent properties of acrylic, its kinship with watercolor. The predominance of the white ground in Jackson's drawings and paintings of the 60s and 70s is arresting. Betty Saar, who met Jackson when the young artist first arrived in Los Angeles, immediately connected to Jackson's female figures floating against white backdrops, seeing them speaking to being a black body in a white world. Not dissimilarly, I have connected those expanses of white with the Alaskan landscape of Jackson's youth, her experience of a physical space all-encompassing and somewhat undifferentiated. Yet white was also discursive, with multiple roles to play, as yes, physical, the reality of being a person of color in a white-controlled social space, but also, and perhaps contradictorily, white as a site of release and peace, a hyper-black North, freedom, and companion to the idea intuited in the Canadian paintings of 19th century African-American predecessors, Grafton Tyler Brown and Robert Selden Duncanson. In early pieces like Grandparents, the whiteness becomes the ground for family or ancestral connection. Hands that grow out of hearts do the work of bonding generations in this double portrait of the artist's forebears. She traces her lineage, literalizing the notion of a family tree in the delicate and wiry stalks of a mustard plant, a symbol of rebirth, that contrast with the washy, floating bodies, their eyes all-seeing yet inwardly focused in a transcendental gaze. Created while pregnant, it is certainly connected to Nest of 1971, which features a small brown child in a sunny jumper, the same color of the scant blooms of vegetation in Grandparents. who is also embraced by heart and hand forms. This notion of building home in place, nesting, and its signaling to the life of birds would continue to take on significance, particularly for its imbrication in Native Alaskan origin stories centering the avian ancestor and trickster raven. Indeed, we might relate this to what Heather Otone describes as kincentricity, or the interconnections among people, animals, plants, places, fungi, microbes, and other elements in Native peoples' lives. In later and larger pieces from the same era, Jackson expands on these themes and further abstracts them with the white ground as a stage set or backdrop. In apparitional visitations, a heart face rests within the core of the Black figure whose gender is not specified. The partial configuration floats between a heart sprouting another delicate bloom and a handsome gangly flamingo. The relationships between all living beings in the work of these paintings from the 70s, which initiate conversations on ecology and the interrelatedness of planetary forms, have only grown more urgent over time. While apparitional visitations is schematic, presenting the seemingly metaphoric connection of these elements, a more readily identifiable and direct relationship between the land, human, and animal is found in The American Sampler, a narrative closely related to grandparents and nest. Here, a central verdant tree shows off its abundant leaves, a heart face embedded in its ample crown, feathery fowl perch atop their plump bodies in earthy browns and blues, recalling human organs. Through this lexicon, Jackson frames hopes and dreams for the planet in a time of transformation. It is her blueprint for change, one that can be done through relationships of care. This is her formula, her equation. She calls it something new in a 1971 painting depicting a bird nibbling off a leafy heart, adding another element, a fat ultramarine line at the top of the painting that curves just so at its ends. A sign of water or sky, it is a link, an equation. This form reappears the same year, perhaps more visibly in None of Us Communicate, where the interdependence and interaction of these same components is matched in the adroit handling of paint, controlled flows slowed with gels, and in Jackson's words, left to bloom. The artist pushes us towards conversations between things of the natural world, hipping us to their equality, made even more diagrammatic in the graphite drawing tree equation, where the curving shape shelters a stand of trees held up by the double horizontal lines of equivalence. The plotting of such visual language perhaps begins even earlier with snow equation, where trees snug in the Alaskan winter are embedded by a curving, or embraced by a curving vermilion sunrise and nourished by a watery mirror image below. The subtle details and gestures in these paintings and drawings made in the short but impactful decades since leaving Alaska bespeak an approach to landscape as schematic or diagrammatic, evincing conceptual framings. It can also be seen as a visual program in conversation with theories of Black and Indigenous feminisms, or as scholar Mishuna Goldman might suggest, Jackson's paintings reflect, quote, multiple social, cultural, and geopolitical meanings that make land and water a key concept in Indigenous political struggle and also feminist struggle, end quote. I turn also to the model offered by Tiffany Lethabo King of a shoaling effect, a structure that is both geological and oceanic, that is mobile, shifting, ecological, and errant. As King opines, quote, the shoal requires new footing, different chords of embodied rhythms, and new conceptual tools to navigate its terrain, end quote. The shoal is transformational, a new utterance and grammar, describes the fundamental distinctiveness of Jackson's work as a whole, but also communicates the parameters of the agile landscapes she envisions and constructs. Planetary nourishment and the care of our living ecosystem is charted again in another formal device by the artist. Snow Equation's stand of trees becomes more flexible and organic, reappearing in various works such as Apparitional Visitations. The compact Sundown presents a portrait of this diagram. The ground rambles in a blooming wash, trees emerge from an undulating baseline, one a faint profile of a woman's face with billowing hair. Often tied to Black arts movement practice in the 60s and 70s, some 1,500 murals were created by Black artists during this period, beautifying and calling attention to neighborhoods suffering from disinvestment and deindustrialization. Jackson created murals in the 60s in conjunction with the Watchtowers Art Center. Two projects from the later 70s were painted under the aegis of Brockman Gallery. Alonzo Davis, thank you. Another platform for the work of Black artists. Wind took shape in 1978 on Crenshaw Boulevard. The later Spirit was sited at Western Avenue at 24th Street. The two-story high, 58-foot-long painting provided an expanded surface for a constellation of imagery: lands, roots, and branches, creatures of the sea, hearts and profiles of the human, all churning on a blue ground, which is both water and sky, primordial and cosmic space. The universe Jackson conjures in Spirit, and that perhaps characterizes her practice throughout the decades, no matter the subject matter or mode of representation, is what scholar Chelsea Frazier terms anaformative, one that resists hierarchy, hegemony, and administration. From this perspective, we can say Jackson's paintings deconstruct colonialities, and in this way, we can be seen as resistive ecologies that rethink relationships to conjure a new sense of planetary life. In the 80s, the artist would shift her base of operations to Idlewild, a small, unincorporated hamlet in the San Jacinto Mountains just south of Los Angeles. Here, away from the city and back in the thrall of nature, shifting from the sprawl of her numerous urban lofts to a modest cabin nestled in the monumentality of the natural world, Jackson turned to small-scale work. Focused portraits of lands such as high frost, centered deep looking and feeling, what one might call a haptic engagement with the soaring elevations that surrounded her. They emphasize vertical thrust, pointing skyward, even as the layers of acrylic wash devolve into the pools and blooms of abstract color that she had become known for. Autumn presents a detailed study of a lone leaf shimmering in a chromatic whirl. Jackson's encounters with the work of Black women abstractionists, Alma Thomas and Mary Lovelace O'Neill, pushed her own work from fantasy and dream towards the atmospheric and environmental. O'Neill's thick and luscious paint handling in her Whale series in particular made an impact, leading Jackson to begin setting aside the wash and transparency she had keenly cultivated. Even as works such as Autumn offered more subtly opaque terrain, her diminutive blue base with its much heavier layers of dense, deep color, Jackson sees as registering a greater conversation with abstraction inspired by Lovelace O'Neill, someone also identified with painting in Northern California. Jackson nevertheless continued to center visible representations of the natural world and the animal kingdom. However, as artist and scholar Samela Lewis would point out, Jackson's alliances with formations in nature is also, quote, suggested by numerous atmospheric voids which, much a part of her compositional structure, contribute to the mystery of her subject and reward the viewer who searches for the possibilities locked within. In the 15 years between her mountaintop perch in Idlewild and landing in Savannah, Georgia in the mid-90s, Suzanne Jackson would complete an MFA in theater design at Yale University. Her studies encouraged the wide-ranging wide-ranging multi-scalar and material installational practice that her own work could have. What bears underscoring is the sense of Jackson approaching such research from a bodily place, the haptics of understanding how the body moved in, among, and within such structures and framing, as one for whom dance and theater was an integral part, not an addition to another practice. Suzanne Jackson moved to Georgia in 1996, accepting a teaching position at the Savannah College of Art and Design. Here in the southern United States, she has made her permanent home, and I'll talk more about that later. In a reverse migration 50 years after her parents set out on their extended and adventurous journey to escape racism and inequality. She lives on a capacious property full of living things, pomegranate trees and grapevines, woodpeckers, turtles, possums, raccoons, and snakes, shared with a few cats. She came to realize, perhaps surprisingly, having not spent much time in this area, thought of as the ancestral wellspring of modern African American life and identity, of how much she shared with Black Southerners, in particular that reassuring sense that something is growing out there. If Jackson was raised on the way to and in the northernmost reaches of the United States, at the midpoint of her century, she finds herself in the country's southern reaches, lands and waterways of sustenance, escape, and rebellion, less than 50 miles from the site of Harriet Tubman's battle with Confederates at the Combahee River in 1863. These areas hold the memories of some of the oldest African-descended people in the US, the Gullah Geechee, and even more ancient and original Native Cherokee and Creek, Iroquoian, and Muskogee populations of the southeastern woodlands. The indigenous and African ancestral here is present and familiar. Inspired by the life forms of her new home south and with the onset of the new century, Jackson embarks on fresh approaches to her painting acts. Lizzie and Me with Friends is a large canvas turned on its corner, a diamond thickly painted, and continued explorations of the animal world. With this rotation of the canvas, Jackson begins releasing the last vestiges of traditional orientations and views of the painted surface, changes we might understand as the result of her ever-expanding dialogue with the facets of the living world. Selu Stories is one of Jackson's first paintings in this moment, meant to be seen not only from a single perspective, standing static, fixed, and in direct confrontation, but in the round, in slow circumnavigation. Its vibrant yellows, greens, and earth tones honors the fecund land, its robe or cape-like presence, magisterial, a gift to the ancestors of that place, and Cherokee goddess of corn Selu, who is remembered every harvest. The inclusion of actual corn husks and other matter, as well as various iterations of the canvas itself, sets the stage for exploding experimentations with materials, grounds, and orientations. Seen in Woodpecker's Last Blues, which you now see again on the screen, bird feathers and leaves embedded in a tondo of netting and acrylic overlaid with fluorescent and pearlescent paint, think through the morning shimmer of earth embraced by dew and dawn. In Jackson's later body of work, the figural marking the work as surreal recedes and otherworldly universes emerge out of those atmospheric voids that Samela Lewis identified in paintings decades earlier. The wash of water-based paint blooming on canvas and natural imagery shifts to dense, material-driven, and abstract. Jackson will eventually discard canvas, boldly moving to create almost exclusively suspended paintings emerging from layers of acrylic, all structural ingenuity and drama. Driven by upcycling, they embrace things like deer netting from her garden and bogus paper used to protect theater sets. Since the 90s, Jackson's paintings have become increasingly more ragged, breaking away from the structure of framed canvas. As art historian Tiffany Barber suggests, these jettison medium expectations, shifting focus to textural, natural edges, replacing the blooming washes. Memory in the artist's later work settles itself on larger African American and Southern histories. As always, Jackson's pieces remain attuned to the ground of their making, the place her body sits and remembers while constructing them. Another painting considers the historical violence Black Americans have faced, taking us also to the 19th century and in closer proximity to a site right outside of Savannah. Crossing Ebenezer references Ebenezer Creek, an outlet of the Savannah River, the location of a Civil War skirmish that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of African Americans. Now valued for its ecological diversity, it has been named a natural landmark. The free-flowing crimson netting of Jackson's piece, sandwiched in translucent acrylic, evokes the bloody skirmish and crimson rivers that resulted. Building up pictures with glazes, gels, found things, and the reuse of studio construction leftovers, like paint residue and water so it doesn't go down the drain, even the bogus paper she uses is chemical-free, helps Jackson create work that is organic and archival. The bloom of color and texture in her paintings in the 21st century turns almost exclusively abstract. Her scenographic training gives the works an architectural heft. Most are suspended from the ceiling and thus can be seen from all sides. Saudades, one of Jackson's most deconstructed paintings, hangs at various levels, a stew of colliding shapes and ragged strips of dangling acrylic and gels. Suzanne Jackson's work is modeled on the anaformative, on a resistive geography. In this way, it seeks to heal histories of extraction and dispossession, and forever offers paradigms of communication, thoughts on coalition. Objects toggle between surfaces of accumulation and transparency, shapes and spaces that are raw and organic, natural and asymmetrical, shoaling and errant. Her art is a portal to historic and ancestral time, both Black and Indigenous, and these works provide us with a material gloss on Black and Indigenous feminisms as well. Their ragged edges, their apparent illegibility, and unknowable framings, as scholar Shania Cordes declares, quote, form the terrain from which disruptive possibilities and futurities emerge, end quote, and celebrate intimacies that allow us to reimagine our world again and anew. Thank you. So,
you're going to answer some questions for us.
Questions.
The floor is open.
Ask away.
I will bring you the mic, or Jisoo will bring you the mic, but I will bring you the mic first.
Hi, thank you so much. So I was just wondering, how did you discover Miss Jackson's work, and when did you become aware of it?
Well, she was part of my show, Now Dig This. She shows up in South of Pico, basically as a gallerist. And then I was actually this comes from a larger piece that will finally come out in the fall for her first large retrospective at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. The show has been delayed on and off because they're actually doing a commission of her work. And, you know, as somebody who spent so many formative years in California and in San Francisco, it's quite apt that she's, you know, going to stand in for Northern California art now, you know, when we've been thinking of all these people like Arneson and such. Mm-hmm. So that's great. But, you know, she shows up, she was a gallerist. And then, you know, I was asked to write this piece that turned now into this, it was something else, but then it turned into this San Francisco Museum of Modern Art piece. And I started thinking about the work like more deeply and realizing, because she had been brought up in Alaska, the relationship to kind of indigenous theory and ritual and just theorizations, systems, land, and it just opened the whole thing up for me about what she was doing. It became so, just so present. You know, it's like, how did I miss this all this time?
So you had a wagon train, and your wagon train caught up with what was going on, right? So this is why we're having a discussion, because you discovered something new before everybody else.
Well, I wouldn't say that, because as I was saying about Melanie Harvey, you know, the first show at the Telfair, which was really the first kind of exploration in depth of her work, brings that out as well. And Melanie Harvey really hit me to the eco-womanism of the work. And then I just kind of took it all the way to indigeneity and became very obsessed with Alaska, still am. And, but also how that relates to, you know, the Great Migration, because you have African Americans, you know, going north and west. But what I didn't realize is that there's a whole generation that then goes to the Pacific, like what's missing from this talk, because I couldn't say all of it, and maybe I need to reorganize it, but you can read it in the book, is that her parents, she was born in St. Louis, and her parents migrate to San Francisco. And then they further migrate to Alaska. And that's really the end point of the Great Migration. Alaska and Hawaii, right? People just keep going. They're trying to find freedom. They're trying to find work. And there's a whole, there's Black life in Alaska from the 19th century, but from the 1940s because of military installations and the development of the highway, which is basically, you know, the highway that goes through Canada to Alaska from the US and is basically built by African Americans and a lot of times by hand. I mean, when you read some of this history, this is more history that we need to still know. It's nothing we've ever heard about, really. But there are, you know, her father was kind of connected to that whole world, and then she came back. Yeah, so.
I look forward to the movie.
You're right. We'll tell her that. She needs to make a movie.
Thank you so much for this very deep and illuminating conversation about this artist. And I love the question that Joyce asked, because I was wondering that as well. And as I was hearing you tell the story, and you just told me more about the path that her family took from St. Louis to California and then to Alaska. But I was thinking, as you were telling us, we're getting deeper into who she was as an artist, that she was gaining momentum in California. You mentioned Mary Lovelace O'Neill, you mentioned Samela Lewis, you mentioned Alonzo and the gallery, and I'm thinking there's this California connection and growth that's happening. And then you mentioned Alma Thomas. So she reached east as well, and I wondered if you could say more about, if there's more to know about her east connection and how that played into her work.
Again, and I'm wondering, you'll hear it from me in another iteration too. But she was at St. Mary's College in Maryland, here, for a while, teaching before she went to Savannah. And she, she's also a poet, so she also became friendly with Lucille Clifton. So she would have seen Alma Thomas's work in the Maryland, D.C. area. And I'm putting these other images. Another thing that I've kind of left out here is, her work in LA with her gallery, Gallery 32, which I talk about in my book, South of Pico, so I leave it out of this part. But, the Sapphire Show, which she does, and you'll see Senga Ngugi there, on the kind of, as Sue Irons, her original name. So that's how long ago that was. But this is probably the first show of Black women artists ever that she does, even before New York. So she's involved with so much. And then you see there her book under her own imprint, Animal. But her first book was called What I Love, Poetry and Painting, right? So she's already been involved with poetry and painting and dance since the 70s, and it eventually takes her here. She's an amazing person, and you know, I think she's in her 80th year. She, you know, never gave up. She kept making her stuff. And now when I say I would come back to, you know, she's living in Savannah, well, actually, she had this amazing house in Savannah, one of these grand, rambling, you know, Southern charm houses. And she's actually, as others are doing now, Black artists, she's created a foundation that will be home for other younger artists, as did MacArthur Binion in Detroit with his Modern Ancient Brown Foundation. So this is something you're seeing from artists. I'm on the board of the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, right? That's been around for a while. So now we see Black artists really doing this because why? Because they're able to get the kind of prices that allow them to do that and give back to people. So she's actually closer living in New York these days, near Professor Collins, but really sponsoring you know, younger artists. So a great, great legacy, but you know, this is women artists. You gotta, you know, 80s is young to actually have this kind of visibility, especially if you're a woman of color, but really all women artists. Yeah. Any other questions? One more.
Oh, okay. That wasn't sure. I'm sorry. Hello. I had a question. I had a question about the materials used in her work for the I guess I don't know if you would call them sculptural pieces because you didn't, so I don't want to say that. But the pieces that are using the netting and like the acrylic and such, and some of the found pieces. My question is. To me, it doesn't seem like it would be considered, I don't know if I'm pronouncing the term right, like art pauvre, but it still has some of the same elements. And so I'm curious about like how you think she stands as an artist who uses what we would consider found objects vis-a-vis like different types of like art, I guess, movements. Right.
It's a great question. Because she's still a painter. Because she's still not giving that up. The found objects are in there, but if you're looking at even newer works, she's never going to give up the kind of idea of a kind of painting substrate in the work. She's going to put all those things in there. She's going to hang them up. She's going to hang them here, but they're not, you know, I don't think they're as deconstructed as somebody like a David Hammons. I mean, he does all sorts of stuff. For instance, also inspired by Arte de Pauvre. But I'd say she doesn't give up painting. What I would say is that she's closer in what she does to somebody like a Jack Whitten, who's using acrylic and making it do other things besides just be a painting on the wall. Right? So it has materiality, as you're pointing out, but she's still not going to give up that paint. That's what makes her different. And that's what's, in some ways, you know, as I said, in the 70s when she kind of starts as a painter, people are like, oh, painting is dead, right? But she keeps at it, and then she does something else with it because she gets trained in theater design. She does theater design for a while. She's just one of these just amazing minds that, and doesn't give up. doesn't give up. So, but it's a great question. Thank you for that.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What a wonderful and illuminating talk. And I know we can't all wait to read the book and to go to San Francisco and see that show. I want to thank you all again for coming out tonight. It's such a joy to see you here. All of you, we never have enough chairs, and that's always just a thrill for me. I'm sorry. We always increase it every year. It's never enough. But we really do sincerely appreciate your support. And we really look forward to seeing you for day 2 of the Porter Colloquium tomorrow down at Smithsonian American Art Museum. Have a wonderful evening, and please get home safe. Thank you.